All right, it is now 1 o'clock. Emily, is the recording started? Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to our webinar highlighting 4 of our many SNEP-funded projects. My name is Adam Riley, and I'm the Communications Coordinator for the Southeast New England Program at EPA Region 1, and I will be facilitating today's event. Before we begin, I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce you to the SNEP program. Next slide. The Southeast New England Program, or SNEP, S-N-E-P, is a geographic program at EPA founded in 2012 that encompasses 3 tribal nations and 2 states. SNEP aims to restore coastal watersheds throughout southeastern New England. Next slide. SNEP encourages a systemic, watershed, and ecosystem level approach to increase the effectiveness of long-term regional restoration efforts and to increase the resilience of natural systems and the communities that inhabit them. By convening governmental and non-governmental organizations to gather and provide their input on how best to address regional challenges, SNEP aims to provide a collaborative framework for the region to identify strategic restoration priorities, enable the testing and adoption of technical best practices, and build a broad regional capacity to adopt and implement innovative approaches. More information about the vision of our program can be found by referencing our strategic plan, which can be found on our website below, which lays out our vision for the region for the next 30 years. Next slide. Our program has 2 main pillars: the SNEP Watershed Implementation Grants Program, or SWIG, which facilitates SNEP funding of on-the-ground implementation projects, and our SNEP Network, which facilitates direct capacity building efforts throughout the region. These 2 programs work in tandem to increase local capacity, collaboration, and communication throughout our region, and to ultimately promote sustained environmental restoration through the implementation of innovative solutions. Today, you will be hearing presentations from 4 previous and current SNEP projects, 2 funded by our SNEP Network, and 2 by our SWIG program. Next slide. Before we begin, I'd like to also briefly mention that SNEP will be hosting a virtual research symposium on May 18th. Oh, can we hit the, oh, there it is. On May 18th, with an aim to highlight regional environmental challenges, promising research, and innovative solutions. Our call for abstracts is currently open for both PowerPoint and poster presentations. To access the submission form or to learn more about the symposium, please visit our SNEP website at www.epa.gov/SNEP. Please also keep an eye out on our newsletter and our website, as registration for this virtual event will go live early next month. Next slide. If you haven't already, I'd like to please remind everyone to mute your microphones and turn off your cameras. This conversation will be recorded and made available on the SNEP website once it's been transcribed. If you have a question during the discussion at the end of our webinar, please type your question in the chat box. Questions will be selected and read during the Q&A session following the presentations. Also, automatic closed captioning is available through the Microsoft Teams optional panel, which can be found by selecting the 3 dots at the top of your screen. Next slide. Our first presenters are Jason Steiding and Kim Groff. Jason has 11 years of experience serving as the director of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe's Public Works Department and recently took over as the tribe's Natural Resources Director in April of 2021. As the tribe's Natural Resources Director, Jason manages the tribe's 12-acre shellfish aquaculture farm and is tasked with overseeing and implementing sustainability and conservation strategies to preserve tribal ancestral lands and to be a steward of the land as his ancestors were thousands of years before him. Kim Groff has dedicated her 30-plus year career to advancing water quality at a project, state, and regional scale. She is currently working as the Massachusetts liaison for the SNEP Network that is administered by the New England Environmental Finance Center. In this role, she works directly with communities to address stormwater management and climate resilience. Jason and Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for this opportunity as well. I will be handling the first portion of this presentation, and then Kim will jump in a little bit. But essentially, we have been focusing our work on Santuit Pond and its restoration, which is located here in Mashpee. this first cover page just gives you a slight idea of some of the players who are involved. But as you'll see on the next slide, this has truly been a collaborative effort up to this point. But on that first slide, of course, are myself and the tribe's assistant natural resources director, Dale Oakley, Kim, who you will be hearing from in a little bit, and Ashley Fisher, who is the town of Mashpee's natural resources director. And I'll be talking about her and our relationship in a little bit more detail in a bit. Next, oh, there it is. Thank you. So again, as I mentioned, this has been a very collaborative effort up to this point, and quite a few people involved. First, I would like to thank the SNEP Network for their technical, financial, training assistance. It's been a huge assistance or help to the tribe and the town as well. And we've been focused primarily on stormwater and watershed management and ecological restoration as part of this project. So I can't thank them and specifically Kim enough. There's a lot of people on this page. I'll just mention a few really quickly. Jamie from UNH has been a wonderful asset to the tribe and has been helping us with stormwater retrofit opportunities on this project. ESS, who have helped us to implement interim measures to address phosphorus and algal blooms. And of course, last but not least, is the town of Mashpee themselves and Ashley Fisher. In Indian country, a lot of times there are acrimonious relationships between the tribes and the towns and the states. And I can say with absolute conviction that that is not the case here. The town is an absolute partner with the tribe and a very, very valuable asset for us. So we're very thankful for that as well. And then there are other people on that slide as well. I can mention a little bit later, but thank you to everyone who is involved. Next slide, please. There it is. Okay. So a little bit about Santuit Pond and the project that we're working on, and a little bit of history on the tribe. So the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe, we're considered the people of the first light. We've been stewards of this land for 12,000 years. There is a section of Santuit Pond, which will show up in another slide in a little bit. It might be tough to see, but there's a little piece of land that juts out into the pond, and that's called Bryant's Neck. And at that location was the site of our Indian meeting house, dating back to 1684. It's been moved currently to its present location on Meeting House Road in Mashpee. It's still in existence and used as a church and a gathering spot, but it's the oldest Indian church in the country. And it was located right on the shores of Santuit Pond hundreds of years ago. Santuit itself, the name Santuit means place of the sachems, and sachems for us were sort of spiritual leaders. So in this area of this pond, sachems would meet for prayer, they'd meet for ceremony, and they'd meet for social gatherings. So it's a very important place to the tribe and has a ton of history. We have 8 parcels of trust land located throughout Mashpee, and then we have some in Middleborough and Taunton as well. The tribe is in a tough spot with our trust land because we don't really control much of our ancestral land. We've got these few little pockets around town that are all pretty much surrounded by town and private land. So we don't really have control of what would be our ancestral area. And, you know, that sort of limits us to what we can do as far as being stewards of the land, especially when it comes to grant opportunities, because very often these opportunities require that the area of focus be on trust lands, and whether it's a waterway or a watershed. So these are some of the issues that we're coming up with, and what makes these relationships with SNEP and the town so important to the tribe. Next slide, please. So this is just, again, a snapshot of the pond located in Mashpee. That one little area that I was talking about, Bryant's Neck, you can see it kind of pokes out there on that top circle. That was where the meeting house was and where we had the gatherings of sachems. But again, the whole pond at one point was heavily traveled by the tribe going back to time millennial. We mentioned on this slide herring run habitat, and that's one of the issues that's going on with this pond. Should have probably mentioned this from the very beginning, that this pond and some of the issues are high phosphorus levels and harmful algal blooms are the biggest problems that we're dealing with. And that has led to some loss of herring habitat, which is a huge issue for the tribe. Herring have a very big existence to us for many reasons. We use them for fertilizer, for food, people use them for bait, and it just goes back as far as you can imagine. So it's very important to us, and these fish are losing their habitat in this pond because of the toxicity. And then the last picture, well, the middle circle will just show Santuit River flowing from the pond out into Papaneset Bay. Papaneset Bay is impaired for total nitrogen levels, and it's affecting shellfish habitat out there as well. As it was mentioned, the tribe does run a 12-acre shellfish grant in that area. Part of it is for nitrogen offset, but it's tough to keep up. Next slide, please. So last but not least, I mean, these numbers on this slide really do say it all. Phosphorus levels are alarming. It's been closed to swimming now. I mean, this is a 170-acre freshwater pond, which is large enough that it should be cycling fresh water, and it's just not. There's just so much that needs to be done on this pond. As listed there, it's listed on the Massachusetts list of impaired water bodies for fish passage, abnormal fish deformity, chlorophyll, nutrient, eutrophic biological indicators, pH, total phosphorus, and clarity. It's quite frankly, it's a mess, and it's a shame to see it in this state, because it doesn't go. You don't have to go back too far. I was a kid in the 70s and can remember sandy shorelines and fishing in this pond. I wouldn't eat anything that came out of this pond right now, and I don't think anyone in town would. So it's really a tragedy. And with the tribe's history on this pond, losing it means that we lose part of our cultural identity. And not only does it affect the tribe, but it affects everyone in town. It affects everyone on the Cape, because this is a natural, precious natural resource that everyone is at risk of losing. And so this is why we're working so hard on this project right now. And it's been a group effort, and we're hopefully heading in the right direction. And from there, I will have Kim Groff take over and getting to more of the technical aspects of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Next slide. So Jason did a great job of putting in the backdrop for this project, and we're fortunate in that there have been quite a bit of studies that have been done, most specifically an AE diagnostic lake feasibility study that was published in 2010 that was funded by the town of Mashpee. And what we know is that the water quality problems are directly linked to land use in the vicinity of the pond, most notably high, medium, and low density residential housing, which has contributed to stormwater runoff and septic system inputs, and then historic agricultural operations, which have led to the discharge of fertilizer into the pond. And together, those two sources have led to an enormous accumulation of sediment in the bottom of the pond that's releasing phosphorus. Next slide, please. So the results of that diagnostic feasibility study that included sampling, modeling, and land use analysis were that over 90% of the load of phosphorus comes from internal nutrient cycling and stormwater runoff to the pond, with the balance from septic and cranberry bogs. Next slide. So we started talking with the tribe just about this time last year, and one of the focuses was, what can we do? Is there anything that we can do to deal with phosphorus in the pond? And so the tribe applied for a technical assistance grant and was awarded. And I'm glad that you talked about the town, because both the town and the tribe partnered and entered into a joint memorandum of agreement with the Environmental Finance Center that administers the SNEP network. And so the scope of the technical assistance was training to help provide uh, teaching and learning opportunities in the design of stormwater retrofit opportunities, contractor assistance through the pre-approved consultant pool with a network, and then pulling it all together into a watershed-based plan. Next slide. And so just a little bit about the network. The purpose of the network is to really empower communities to address their issues and to meet communities where they're at, overcome barriers, and really get towards implementation. Next slide. So this is a lot of information on one slide, but if you look at the right-hand side, as Jason pointed out, there is a nutrient TMDL for nitrogen for Pompanesett Bay, and the town has embarked on planning to implement sewer collection, both in the town and the housing units around the pond. There has also been the purchase of historic cranberry operations and the set aside of that land in preservation. So the focus of what I'm going to talk about today is what's happening in the short term. And there's been a lot of work that's been done. The town installed solar bees. They were largely found to be ineffective. The tribe also partnered with the Corps of Engineers on a dredging study. The original study was to dredge the entire pond bottom. It's a 170-acre pond, and that was found to be economically infeasible. And then also the town has stepped up its enforcement and testing of septic systems in direct vicinity within a few hundred feet of the pond. And that will be largely implemented by 2023. On a parallel path, the town also applied for an MVP, Mass Vulnerability Program Action Grant, and was awarded a project with a consultant, Fuss & O'Neill, to identify stormwater retrofit opportunities. And then, of course, the SNEP Network Technical Service Award that I described previously. And I'm going to focus here on out on the SNEP component of the project. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we set up a stormwater planning series, which involved both representatives of the tribe and the town, but also 4 other communities in Rhode Island. And the purpose of the planning series and workshop was to provide training and facilitated planning to identify opportunities for stormwater retrofits. And this slide shows our site visit that happened in October, some preliminary conceptual designs that have been developed for the town landing. And we're next will be developing sizing for a bioretention system and cost estimates. And the series started in November and is expected to wrap up in May. Next slide. We also used our pre-approved consultant pool to hire ESS Group to look at what could we do short term to deal with the phosphorus in the pond. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, when we started this, we thought that there might be some potential with the dredging, but what we found is that dredging is not feasible and will not address phosphorus. So what we thought was going to be an interim measure, actually we had to pivot a little bit and go to a long-term measure. And it looks like alum treatment is going to pop up to the top of the list as the most viable short-term option to deal with phosphorus, not only in the short term, but also the long term. And the town has put in a budget request of $450,000 to implement alum and stormwater BMPs. Next slide. Oops. And last, we wanted to wrap it up all together into a watershed-based plan, which included the 9 elements, and we brought in some of the thoughts about stormwater retrofit designs, alum treatment, and an implementation schedule and budget. Next slide. And then just to wrap all this up, our current schedule is that we'll have these reports coming out. We're going to engage the community in discussions around stormwater retrofits, and also hopefully identify some funding to carry forward testing and design for the alum treatment. And also the Fuss and O'Neill report is due out at the end of June. So we're hoping that all these different activities that are in the queue are going to lead to implementation of not only stormwater BMPs, but also alum treatment in early 2023. Next slide. And just wraps up the presentation here. So all the contributors to this presentation are listed here. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate, Jason and Kim. I'm just going to remind everyone that we're going to hold off on questions until the end. But if you do have questions for Jason and Kim, feel free to type those in the chat box until then. So I'd now like to introduce our next presenter, Kate McPherson. Kate is Save the Bay's Narragansett Bay Riverkeeper. She's a professional wetland scientist who's passionate about wetland and river restoration, engaging community members to take steps to improve watershed health, and using sound science to inform policy. Kate holds her bachelor's in wildlife biology and management from the University of Rhode Island. It's all yours, Kate.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in this afternoon to hear about another SNEP-funded project. The restoration plan that Save the Bay and many other project partners developed to address pollution in Hundred-Acre Cove and the Run-Ins River. The Run-Ins River is the main tributary to Hundred-Acre Cove, and Hundred-Acre Cove is an embayment in northern Narragansett Bay. This project, again, couldn't be possible without SNEP funding, Restore America's Estuaries, Rhode Island DEM, Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, the 3 towns, the 3 municipalities that are in the watershed. So that's East Providence, Rhode Island, Seekonk, Massachusetts, and Barrington, Rhode Island, as well as Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, who did a lot of our map work. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of context where we are in the bay. This graphic on the right is Narragansett Bay. The red arrow points down to where Hundred-Acre Cove is located. And you can see it's a unique position because it's right on the border between Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So a lot of the watershed is within Massachusetts, but a lot of the pollution and all of Hundred-Acre Cove is entirely within Rhode Island. So there's a little bit of a jurisdictional boundary there. And there's a fairly large bacterial problem in Hundred-Acre Cove. Those waters have been closed since the 90s to shellfishing. And although there's not a public bathing beach there, it's a popular spot for either locals that have docks on the embayment to go swimming. Folks row there all the time. It's a good place to put in a kayak. But apart from the no shellfishing sign, there's really not a whole lot of signs to anybody who might be using the cove that there's a bacterial problem. And in my interactions with folks on the cove, people who I know who live there or play there, a lot of them weren't aware of the bacterial problems. Next slide, please. And so we broke down our project into 5 main tasks. And so the first task was, well, what's already been done? What's been studied in this area? So I know the font is pretty small on this graphic, but it's just this timeline from 1988 up to 2021, where we looked at total management, the TMDL for bacteria. We looked at previous watershed groups. There was a Run-ins River task force that was really active in the 90s and early 2000s. They did a tremendous amount of water quality testing. We looked at those water quality issues that they had collected. Other documents, there was a watershed plan that was developed that identified different potential solutions, and we looked to see, were any reports, basically just gathering all of this information to find out what's already out there for this area. Next slide, please. And as part of the information gathering, we knew we wanted to partner with Narragansett Bay Estuary Program to develop new watershed maps. So we worked really closely with the town of Seekonk to do things like get information about the septic systems in town and how old they were and how recently they had been inspected, for example. We looked at a lot of sea level rise predictions to see if any septic systems, for example, were within a potential sea level rise area. We looked at land use, impervious cover. One of the great things about this project is in our quest to find these different data sources to create these maps, we found gaps in the data. So we, again, worked really closely with the town of Seekonk to complete mapping of their stormwater system. So they knew that there were at least 20 outfalls that were shown on a map, but maybe not super accurately. So Save the Bay was able to go out and really on the ground find those outfalls and complete and really take a good magnifying glass look and complete all these different layers to create new watershed maps. Next slide, please. And so this is just sort of a zoomed in section of Hundred-Acre Cove. You can see East Providence on the left to the west, and you can see Barrington on the right to the east, showing that this is a fairly urbanized section of the watershed. There's a lot of urban lands. There's not a lot of forested lands. There are a lot of wetlands, but pretty much this watershed's pretty built up. Next slide, please. And then here's another zoomed in section of stormwater infrastructure. So stormwater is really important to know if there are pollutants or bacteria sources, dog waste, what have you, in the watershed and they get swept up into the stormwater system. There's often direct pipes that flow either directly into wetlands or directly into the Run-ins River or Hundred-Acre Cove. In our exploration of stormwater systems, we definitely found catch basins with dog poop bags in them. And so that informed our messaging. In fact, we're working directly with that municipality to put up signs and do education in the neighborhood where all those catch basins are located. Next slide, please. And then we knew that Hundred-Acre Cove, we knew that the bacterial problem in Hundred-Acre Cove was really substantial. And for a long time, folks supposed that there was some sort of point source for the bacterial levels. But over the course of our research in the watershed that surrounds Run-ins River, we learned that there are just a lot of septic systems that are either really old, are cesspools, are really close to water bodies, or are in a flood zone. And so what we did was we worked very closely with the town of Seekonk, and we worked incredibly close, and Narragansett Bay Estuary Program created this map that shows a priority ranking. And this is an interactive map that's located on our website. It's on the web if anybody is curious and wants the link later. But you can sort and come up with lists of parcel identification for these septic systems. So if you only care about septic systems within 500 feet of a water body, you can sort and look at all those systems. If you only care about really old systems, you can sort all those. But if, let's say, you care about really old systems that are also within 500 feet, you can really dig down and get pretty granular with where these old septic systems potentially might be. And one thing that we can do with this data is send targeted either mailers or work with local septic haulers, or and try and get property owners to either do maintenance or do inspections preemptively before things break down. Because right now in Massachusetts, um, the inspections are only triggered when the property is being sold through Title V. I'll give you a couple more seconds with this slide because there's a lot of information on it, but we're really proud of taking some pretty complex data and showing it and really distilling it down to which things are most important for water quality. Next slide, please. And then Narragansett Bay is incredibly vulnerable to sea level rise. We looked at projections for sea level rise and where new wetlands will be formed and new tidal habitat will be formed. So currently, the leftmost image is where our tidal wetlands are in Hundred-Acre Cove right now. And with 1 foot of sea level rise, you can see there's new tidal habitat that will be established. And part of what we do at Save the Bay is trying to find places for new tidal habitat, new tidal wetlands to migrate to. There, Route 114 runs along the western edge of Hundred-Acre Cove and is a pretty significant barrier to sea level rise and for marsh migration. So we have identified a number of projects that will hopefully address new places for marshes to migrate to. And then you can see as the projects continue, or as sea level rise continues, the tidal habitat gets more and more until we start to lose tidal habitat through actual sea level rise. Next slide, please. So the third task that we took upon ourselves is looking at the water quality monitoring data. There was a tremendous amount of really old and then more recent water quality data in the Run-Ins River and in Hundred-Acre Cove. And this is just sort of a snapshot that shows where those water quality data were taken and who took them and what the goals of those data are. And so we determined that at this point, taking water quality samples for the sake of taking water quality samples wouldn't do much good in this watershed. What we would really like to do is implement some water quality projects with specific goals in mind for water quality, and concurrently during the project and after the project, see if those projects made measurable differences on bacterial counts. Next slide, please. And sort of the biggest and most important piece of all of this work that we put in is identifying these restoration and adaptation projects. So the first or second slide I showed you was all of these documents that had already been written about Hundred-Acre Cove and the watershed. And we looked at which of these projects had been recommended, which ones were done. And so this sort of shows you, we created a Google My Map to put places on these projects, locations on these projects, and saw that, some of these projects had already been done. Some of them hadn't been done. And over the course of our work in this watershed, we definitely identified new projects that we think will make a big difference. And if you're interested in specific projects, the publication is on our website. Definitely take a look. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have already implemented is storm drain marking, both through Save the Bay's volunteer program and working with local departments of public works. This was a great project to do during the pandemic because you didn't necessarily need large groups. You could sort of go out with a map and mark storm drains in your neighborhood as you like. Next slide, please. And so our final task was to come up with this comprehensive plan that took all of this work and took all of and built upon everything that came before it. So we have information for municipalities about all the funding sources that are available on a rotating basis. We have gotten all of our municipalities in the watershed either MVP, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Certified, or MRP, Municipal Resilience Program. That's the Rhode Island counterpart to MVP, so that these towns are eligible for action grants. Because we have a watershed plan in this watershed, they're also eligible for 319 grants. And we came up with a spreadsheet of all different grants that are available when they generally come up, and support to help municipalities. So again, if you're interested in the details, this document is available on Save the Bay's website under publications. And we're really proud of the work that all the partners did for this project, and look forward to continuing advocating for and supporting municipalities as they pursue projects to improve water quality in this area. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate. Our next presenter is Stephanie Covino. Steph manages the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative based at Clark University, which serves to improve climate resilience and watershed health in the bi-state watershed's 39 communities. She has her master's in environmental science and policy from Clark University and is a Keystone Cooperator and MVP certified provider. Her interests include land use planning, natural resource protection, ecological restoration, and nature-based solutions to reduce climate hazards and improve community resilience. The floor is yours, Steph.
Thanks so much, Adam, and thanks for having me today. So we can go into the next slide here, and I'll tell you a little bit about the Blackstone River first. So the watershed itself encompasses 2 states and 39 communities. So we have 29 in Massachusetts and 10 in Rhode Island. So similar to what Kate was talking about, we work within both of those states. The entire watershed's about 475 square miles. And it's really important to remember that it drops about almost 450 feet over its 48 miles. And in the next slide, we see why that's so important. So that really steep change in elevation allowed, when we get to the next slide here, allowed us to dam the river in several different locations and be able to use that power to create America's first water-powered cotton mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So this was the start of the American Industrial Revolution. We also built a canal in several different areas, which remains to this day. Sometimes it's in the same location as the river, sometimes it's separate. But we were able to take goods up and down that river, and we were called America's hardest working river because of this. So in the next slide, we'll see that this river has always sort of been important in a national sense. So as I mentioned, the hardest working river in America in the 1900s. And then if you just want to keep clicking through till we get to the end there, we'll get to 2022 in a minute. It was called the most polluted river in America in terms of toxic sediments that are behind all of those dams, which still remain to this day. In 1972, we held the largest one-day regional environmental cleanup. That stands to this day as well. It was called Operation ZAP, and 10,000 volunteers got together and removed over 10,000 tons of trash from this river. And they also created several parks along the river. Their goal was to bring attention to the river and make it more of a recreational opportunity for people, more of an asset, instead of just a place to bring their trash to. They also wanted to really think about the floodplain and protecting that floodplain. If you remember, 1972 is also when the Clean Water Act was passed. So there was a lot of environmental momentum at that time. In '86, we became a Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. In '97, we got an American Rivers Heritage River designation. We were the site of an urban rivers pilot project from the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA. In 2014, we actually established the Blackstone River Valley National Historic Park. And then in 2022, just as I mentioned, that 50-year anniversary of both ZAP and the Clean Water Act. So we're hosting a lot of events and opportunities for people to get involved and learn more about the watershed and the strong history of volunteerism that we have here. On the next slide. So just as I said, we have a lot of really passionate people that work in this watershed. And the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program decided to really focus on how we could use all of that to work together better. So if you look at maps of several different funding opportunities, such as the SNEP program or such as the Division of Ecological Restoration in Massachusetts, we see that there's often a gap within this watershed. So our communities have a lack of capacity. We're often underfunded and understaffed for a lot of really small nonprofits in our communities. And so during this program, the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program took about 2 years. They held 8 meetings. We had almost 150 people attend. This was right in the middle of the pandemic, so everything had to be virtual. That first meeting and the last meeting were in person, but everything else was virtual. And they got about 40 different organizations and 11 different government agencies together and said, how can we bring more projects and more funding to this region? We want to be able to work together and improve resources. So the next slide, we'll see again that capacity was really a top concern. And what we came up with was the Blackstone River Watershed Needs Assessment Report, which I always have with me, basically. And one of the things that was identified was the need for watershed coordination. So we looked at projects and that were on a really small scale, what would be important for our watershed and make a big difference, as well as things on the municipal level and the watershed level. So on the next slide, we can see that the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative was born in September of 2021. So we're just about 6 months old now, still pretty fresh. And we've received funding from the SNEP Network and SNEP itself, as well as the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program. We meet monthly every third Friday and try and get together all these different stakeholders. So we have about 190 individuals right now representing over 100 different organizations and agencies. Some of those, most of them are local to our watershed in both Mass and Rhode Island, including partners such as our wastewater treatment plant operators, our municipalities. We have consulting agencies, we have watershed associations and groups, we have land trusts. So we also have a lot of state and federal agencies. So it's quite diverse. And our goal is really to implement the 20 different priorities within the needs assessment report. So I'll go over what some of those priorities are in a few minutes. But we'd like to be able to accomplish sort of a first step in those and then over the next 5 years. Overall, our goal is improving watershed health and specifically in the face of development and climate change. We also want to bring a lens of equity and justice. We have several mapped environmental justice areas within this watershed, but also we understand that each of our municipalities, whether mapped as an overburdened EJ community or not, have vulnerable residents. And a lot of these municipalities are understaffed. And so we want to be able to bring that technical assistance where it's needed most. So next slide, please. So you can click straight through those. Sorry for having all those animations. The goal is really being able to stop recreating the wheel, prioritize projects. So if a municipality has identified a critical project within their community, and it's also very important within the watershed, we can bring resources and attention to that, maybe help them apply for funding or bring technical assistance to elevate that project and hopefully get it accomplished to be able to improve the entire watershed as a whole. We also want to think about unified messaging, particularly with this 50th anniversary of the ZAP, the Blackstone program and the Clean Water Act. We want to be able to have shared events that we can bring people together and people can see, hey, this watershed is working together now and has more of a cohesive message instead of lots of really small groups trying to do their own thing. We can all support one another. Next slide, please. So we have a shared watershed with shared goals. You can click through. Here are some of those goals, including maintenance of our waterways. That canal is 200 years old and it's falling apart in some areas. We have our national park and a lot of the elements of that park that that need maintenance. We also want to expand our bikeway and greenway. This is a really important project, particularly this year, as there's a lot of funding coming. And we have former Senator Dick Moore, who is a huge advocate for this and really helping us along to try and get funding within the state budget in Massachusetts to identify specific areas of expanding that bikeway. We want to be able to bring equitable access to these waterways. So we know that a lot of our overburdened communities are those that might benefit the most from, if you've heard John Marsland from the Friends of the Blackstone speak about the blue mind, being on, near, around water reduces stress and anxiety. So some of our communities who might benefit the most from it have the least access to it. So identifying where we have access to our river and our tributaries, and identify where we need it, as well as improving existing access to make it more available for all of our different residents, whether you're visually impaired, mobility impaired, et cetera. A lot of our put-ins right now for kayaking, for instance, are down really steep slopes and need some help in order to make those a little bit more accessible. Water chestnut is also a huge problem in our watershed in a lot of our lakes and ponds. So invasive species and water chestnut removal is a priority. Increase land protection as well, particularly in the southwest portion of our watershed. We do have a lot of land that is still available for conservation and can offer an opportunity for increasing those ecosystem services that it's already providing. On the next slide, we'll see some additional shared goals. So I've just identified some of these. One of them is modifying local regulations that encourage these cost-effective nature-based solutions. So we're all about these nature-based solutions, low impact development, green infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, but being able to not only implement them on the ground, but also change local regs that will encourage or require these, I think will be really important into the future, as well as thinking about things like looking at higher sea level rise in some of our communities, looking at increased precipitation amounts and making sure that our development and our infrastructure that we're building is able to withstand our future climate projections, not just what we have as a climate today or what we had as a climate 50 years ago for older regulations. We want to be able to recognize developers who are using those best practices and show that it can be done. We want to be able to create a green jobs program focusing on green infrastructure maintenance. So this is something that communities often highlight as an issue of being able to implement green infrastructures. They can't maintain it. We have a great long-term monitoring program here. We have 75 sites throughout the river where the Blackstone River Coalition has been through about 19 years now, identifying water quality on the river and its tributaries, but they're searching for funding every year. So being able to identify where we can get long-term funding and create a database where we can see that data quickly and be able to act upon it, as well as improving aquatic connectivity. So not only do we have a lot of dams on our river, but we also have thousands of culverts. So being able to improve those culverts so that they meet Massachusetts stream crossing standards, even in Rhode Island, using the same idea of those standards, being able to have appropriate fish passage and make them safer for flooding as well. We also want to be able to remove the lower, want to be able to create fish passage on the lower 4 dams within the Blackstone River in Rhode Island as well. Next slide, please. It's lagging here for me anyway. I think the next slide is perfect. Is the main point of this report was that our water quality has improved. So I mentioned the Clean Water Act. We have done a great job on point source pollution. Our wastewater treatment plants, for instance, have done a fantastic job at reducing the effluents coming out of those treatment plants. And we do have quite a bit of open space here, but you can see that in particularly the northern part around Worcester and the lower part around Woonsocket, we have a high amount of impervious surfaces in urban areas. And so if we click to the next one, we can see that as this changes and we increase our impervious surfaces, we're actually decreasing our water quality. You can click again, I think twice, and we'll see that impaired waters are often around our impervious surfaces, of course. So being able to really focus on land use changes within this watershed is going to be important moving forward, particularly in the face of climate change. So we'll go to the next slide and you can click through that one. This is something that probably you guys know, but development, we have in these impervious surfaces And as climate change affects us with increased temperatures, extreme precipitation, and increased drought, our communities are affected by these nutrients, warmer waters, really flashy systems, and drinking water shortages. So go ahead to the next slide. We know that healthy communities depend on a healthy watershed, so we have these problems. But if we can focus on natural resource protection and adaptation measures, we can click again. Through each of these, we can benefit from recreation and tourism, physical and mental health, built infrastructure, transportation, and reduced need for municipal services. If we can focus on these and be really smart about these cost-effective solutions, then we can also help communities avoid costs and also focus on our most vulnerable residents. You can click through twice more here and then on to the next slide. Thanks. I mentioned environmental justice areas. The Narragansett Bay Estuary program put together this story map to look at things like heat island, tree cover, asthma rate, flooding, water quality. And you can see that the same areas are hit again and again for each of these different issues. And so again, we really want to be able to focus on some of our most overburdened communities. Go ahead to the next slide. Some of the things that we're doing as a collaborative are passing local resolutions. So we have worked so far with 4 communities. We met with the town of Uxbridge last night. They did not yet agree to pass this resolution, but it's basically awareness of the needs assessment report, identifying the specific goals that it has, and noting that the goals within their community are also within this larger watershed goal, and to incorporate these goals that we've identified within the needs assessment report into local planning, like that MVP and MRP, as well as open space planning. We're also working with the communities on the bottom there, including Uxbridge, Worcester, Hopkinton, Sutton, Burrillville, Rhode Island, etc. So we'll be working to pass these resolutions in all the communities in support of the needs assessment report and the collaborative. Next slide, please. We're also working to spread the word about the SNEP Network. So every time we meet with the town, we tell them about the great technical assistance that you have, whether it's about bylaw review, project feedback, or financing and funding. Next slide, please. And we're also looking at how to incorporate the goals of the collaborative into these other events. So we're hosting this cleanup and green up on August 27th and the celebration on September 10th about this Zap the Blackstone program. You can click through these, please. You can learn more about Zap the Blackstone at zaptheblackstone.com and either sign up for hosting an event, or sign up for your community needing to host it, or requesting volunteers to come to your community as well. So go ahead and go through. Thanks. We're hosting, we can skip through this for time, but there are a lot of different events coming up that I'm happy to speak more about, but we're doing third Saturdays in March to July to host Blackstone Days. And we're also incorporating a lot of the regional goals within the Watershed Collaborative into this local planning, as well as larger statewide planning. So we're working on an urban restoration project in Worcester, open space planning in Northbridge. We have these resolutions. We're part of the CMRPC, our regional planning agency's regional plan, Imagine 2050. We co-lead the nature-based solutions work group for Mass ECAN. We're involved in the steering committee for NBEP, as well as the Massachusetts statewide climate change assessment working group. So there's a lot we're working on. You can go to the next slide, which has my contact information. And thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steph. And I know there were a lot of really excellent resources that were hyperlinked through your presentation. I should also mention that all the slides for these presentations will be made available following the webinar once the recording is posted. And actually, Steph, I know we had to click through those events, but I think you and I need to touch base offline because we can also incorporate or highlight a lot of those events on our SNEP website and also in our newsletter. So for those on the call, definitely keep in mind to touch base on those resources as well. So thank you again, Steph. And now I'd like to introduce our final presenter. His name is Dennis Martin. Dennis is a member of the Falmouth Rod and Gun Club and is currently president of the Sporting Safety Conservation and Education Fund, which is a 501c3 associated with the club. The Falmouth Rod and Gun Club initiated and has managed the Upper Childs River Restoration Project since its inception in 2014. As a member of the management team that has brought the project to near completion, Dennis will share some of the work that the team and its many partners have completed. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. The Upper Childs River Restoration Project, if you go to the next slide. The Upper Childs River Restoration Project area is located in the southwest corner of Cape Cod, slightly north of a walkway bay and just to the west of the Santuit project that you heard earlier. As illustrated at the right, the project focused on the Garner Bogs in the north, the Farley Bog in the center, and impounded water bodies, earthen dam, spillway, fish ladder, and deteriorated culvert at the southern end. Serious discussions and restoration planning began in 2014 when the cranberry farmer decided farming the bogs was no longer economically viable for him. Restoration of this area was of interest to the Falmouth Rod and Gun Club, as it owned approximately 200 acres of land along the river and surrounding or abutting the cranberry bogs, all within a 5,800-acre Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge. In 2014, with conservation in mind, the Falmouth Rod and Gun Club set out to restore a major portion of the Upper Childs, covering a distance of a little over 1.25 miles. Next slide, please. The objective of the restoration was to rechannel the river, remove physical barriers to fish passage, reestablish a cold water fishery, and in turn to foster the return of the sea-run brook trout. Other key objectives were to convert established cranberry bogs into wetlands in order to create a habitat for migratory birds and other wildlife. To improve water quality, as the wetlands would act as a filtration system for water resources. To protect the land through conservation restrictions, to ensure the proposed area would remain undeveloped, and to enable access for the public to better understand the environment, ecosystem restoration, and nature in general. Next slide, please. In the beginning stages of this private and public partnership, the breadth of coordination between the club, the towns of Falmouth and Mashpee, and the state, local, and national entities was essential. A formal kickoff meeting of the key partners and agencies took place at the Rod and Gun Club on May 8, 2017. Working with our engineering firm, Interflu, concept plans were developed and approved a little more than 2 months later. As detailed thinking was applied, studies and assessments performed, a 60% design plan was presented in December of 2018. Additional studies, assessments, and analyses led to a 100% design plan a year and a half later. 6.5 years of laborious preparation, with final permitting complete, construction began on August 26, 2020. At present, the construction portion of the project is nearly complete. Next slide, please. Before we view the physical transformation of the project area, a review of the before state landscape would help set the stage. These aerial snapshots illustrate a somewhat stagnant river system with overgrown cranberry bogs sitting on the top of potential wetlands. The two mill ponds north and south of Carrot Shop Road in Falmouth are surrounded by trees. In the first photo, the impounded water body south of the road was created by an earthen dam at its southern end. As indicated by the arrow, water exited to the lower Childs via a spillway. A non-functional fish ladder was hidden by the tree line at the left. This southern area was of particular interest to the Massachusetts Historical Commission, as it was home to a small industrial area in the early to mid-1800s. A woolen company, carriage shop, blacksmith shop, and the Wacoit River Herring Company were located here. As a result, the Public Archaeology Laboratory would conduct a cultural resources survey before final permitting, and any construction could begin. The existing culvert under Carrot Shop Road was undersized, had deteriorated over time, and needed to be replaced. In addition, it was blocked with debris, which created further damming action for the water body north of the road. In addition, ditches and flow control devices in the bogs trapped and restricted water flow. The bogs had become overgrown and invasive species were taking hold. All in all, this created a hostile environment for brook trout and other aquatic wildlife as water temperatures rose to the high 60s and 70s in some areas during the summer. Next slide, please. In preparation for construction to begin, previously acquired wood had to be sorted. Hundreds of tons of farmers' stockpile sand had to be removed in order to make way for bog materials and extracted sediment. Brush was cleared at the dam, spillway, and fish ladder areas so that the Public Archaeology Laboratory had visible access to conduct their survey. Tree clearing at both ponds was necessary for heavy equipment access and their ease of movement. Next slide, please. Once the preparatory work was completed, water channel diversions were dug at both ponds and both cranberry bogs. The diversions helped guide water around and away from the proposed river channel construction and allowed water passage in a controlled manner while work was being done in the respective areas. It should be noted that construction was constrained by the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries time of year restrictions. These restrictions limit the time of work can be done and take place on the coastal waterways. This occurred in both the fall of 2020 and the spring of 2021. These aerial views show diversions along the east side of both ponds and through the center of the Farley Bog. The eastern Garner Bog was populated with ditches and a perimeter trench. This trench was expanded to help control water flow. Next slide, please. Restoration work began in earnest at the upstream Garner Bogs in the town of Mashpee. The new river channel was constructed along the western tree line of the eastern bog. The trees would help shelter the river from hot summer sun. The river meandered from the old pump house in the north to its exit at the south end. Wooden materials were installed at and along the river. The farmer's holding pond at the northern end was expanded to make it a future home for diving ducks. Two shallower ponds for dabbling ducks and other wildlife were constructed at both the eastern and western bogs. The final aerial view illustrated a wetlands in the making. Next slide. With work at the Garner Bogs well underway, similar construction efforts took place at the Farley Bog in the town of Falmouth. As with the Garner Bogs, wooden materials consisting of trees, root wads, and slash materials were installed to stabilize the riverbank, shade the river, as well as prevent erosion and protect future fish populations from predators. The holding pond to the north was expanded into a newly constructed shallow pond. The combined water body created a rather large pond for ducks and wildlife, as seen from the aerial view at the bottom center. It is difficult to see, but the final photo implies how groundwater management presented a challenge to the project. Next slide. As things were winding down at the Farley Bog, the new construction crew moved to the southern Mill Pond area or impounded area. With the spillway removed and the fish ladder buried, the earthen dam was breached. The dam area was opened up and a long reach excavator began removing the saturated sediment from the bottom. As seen in the right-hand aerial view, water management was a problem here as well. The area drained well enough for the river channel to be dug, fabric encapsulated soil lifts put in place, and root wads strategically positioned. Snags and woody debris were added to provide critical habitat for birds and mammals and to assist in helping stabilize the landscape around the open channel. Next slide. When work efforts moved to the northern pond, water management presented a much more significant obstacle. Sediment traps were built and a 3-stage over-the-road discharge basin was set up to filter large amounts of sand-carrying water. The filtered water was then redirected to the Childs River downstream of the basin. Like the southern pond, the channel was dug, soil lifts and snags were installed. In the end, the northern pond finally cleared out. Next slide, please. The final major undertaking of the restoration project was replacing the old and deteriorated culvert and constructing the new section of road. 4 18-ton sections of culvert along with auxiliary components were delivered one at a time, carefully unloaded and staged for installation. The 4 foundational sections were then meticulously positioned and secured. Wing walls and guardrail guides were then installed. Road fill was brought in, compacted, and eventually graded to road level. Finally, the road was paved, guardrails installed, road lines painted, and then opened to traffic on August 24th, 2021, a little less than a year after construction began. Next slide. In the end, giving nature a helping hand is often necessary. This restoration did just that. With most of the construction complete, the addition of many plantings, hydroseeding of specific areas, and microtopography applied in the bog areas, nature was well on its way. The aerial views illustrate a winding river with vegetation taking hold. The system is totally groundwater fed, and with removal of the mill ponds at the southern end of the project, water temperatures in July had dropped from the 70s to 58 degrees, ideal for the trout. This is a great success story, as now the sea-run brook trout can survive and have returned to the upper Childs. In addition, the bogs have been transformed into authentic wetlands for all wildlife. The ponded areas will remain separate from the river system as berms were established. Microtopography has unearthed dormant seedlings to create a lush carpet. To determine just how successful we were in the transformation, we are working with Mass Wildlife, Woodwell Climate Research Center, the Division of Ecological Restoration, and the Association to Preserve Cape Cod to capture the ecological and environmental impacts to the area over the next 5 years. Next slide. Next slide, please. A project of this undertaking could not have been completed without the support, involvement, and contributions of our club members, partners, state, local, and federal agencies, donors, and neighbors. A special thank you goes to the EPA, the Southeast New England Program, and Restore America's Estuaries, Tom Ardito. Last slide, please. If you would like more details about the restoration or to better understand some of the details behind the project, send us an email at sscef2019@gmail.com or visit us on our website at www.sscefund.org. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dennis. And a big thank you to all of our presenters for those excellent presentations. I'd now like to open it up for questions, either for EPA or our presenters. Please go ahead and type your questions in the chat box and I will read them. Just please also be sure to designate who your question is for. So we actually already have one question in the chat, which I will bring up now. This question is for Jason and Kim. And the question is, if the Army Corps can participate or is available to participate in a limited dredging project to improve spawning habitat at Santuit Pond, how might the tribe feel about the options being considered for dredge material disposal where a piece of the pond would be used to create a shrub-type wetland. Should the open water be protected due to the sacred nature of the place, of the pond?
Adam, we actually have had discussions with Army Corps about that exact scenario, where a smaller section of the pond, I believe it's closer to the south western section of the tribe, bottom lower southwestern section, would be dredged, and a new sort of upper wetlands habitat would be created. That has been discussed.
So that does seem to be something that the tribe is open to, or?
We are certainly open to it, right? I don't know if it's going to happen yet, but it's an option that has been discussed in lieu of the entire pond.
Awesome, thank you, Jason. It doesn't look like we have any other additional questions. So again, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box for any of our speakers. But actually, I do have another question from Kim's presentation. You had mentioned that the use of CVs were not feasible, and I was wondering if you might elaborate a bit on what that is. Oh, is Kim still on? I lost Kim. Okay. Let's see. 2 minutes left. Thank you. All right. So it doesn't look like there's any other questions. There's definitely no need for us to prolong this if there aren't any other questions available. So I'll go right ahead, and I think we can close things out. So again, a big thank you to all of our presenters. And as a reminder, this webinar will be transcribed and posted to our website using the link below. So it's www.epa.gov/SNEP. And then there's a button there for SNEP webinars. And I would also like to invite everyone to please register for our newsletter. If you haven't already, you can register online or with the QR code at the bottom of this page. It usually takes about 2 weeks for this webinar or for the recording to be transcribed. So we'll be sure to send out a thank you email with the link for that video as well. So thank you all for attending, and thank you to our presenters, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.